Note 7.2 Photosynthesis, Chloroplast. What I want for you to do right now is to be able to explain or tell me the difference between an autotroph and a heterotroph. Why do plants need sunlight? And what gases are exchanged between plants and animals? This should be a review to start thinking about photosynthesis for the notes today. In note 7.2 and then in 7.3, we're going to overview photosynthesis. The objectives for right now are to be able to list the inputs and outputs of photosynthesis, to be able to identify the structures in a chloroplast, and to start to summarize light-dependent and independent reactions. Photosynthesis is the process of converting light energy to chemical energy. This is used by autotrophs to produce food. All of our energy starts as light energy. Plants use sunlight to make food. Animals eat plants, other animals eat those animals, and so forth. Photosynthetic organisms. They go through photosynthesis to produce glucose. Autotrophs are photosynthetic organisms. They are producers in the food web, and they consist of plants, protists, and cyanobacteria. The chemical equation for photosynthesis is as follows. Some things to note. For every 6 carbon dioxide molecules, they require 6 molecules of water, H2O. You'll notice that light is not really a part of the reactant side of the equation. The reason why light is not a part of the reactant side is that light is not matter. So it kind of acts like a catalyst in this equation, in which it kind of starts the equation. You cannot have photosynthesis if you don't have light, but in itself it is not matter, it's energy. So it's energy that's added to the reaction to help get it going. Then we have the product side. So for every 6 carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water, you will make 1 glucose molecule. And you will make 6 oxygen molecules. These are the products. This is what is produced by the reaction. This happens, photosynthesis, it happens in 2 phases that we'll talk about later in the notes. Just a quick overview of the phases, a summary, so to speak. The first phase is called light dependent. Light energy is absorbed in this phase and converted into chemical energy in the form of ATP and a new form of chemical energy called NADPH. It also produces oxygen as a byproduct. And what that means, it's not the main goal of the reaction, but as a result, it also produces oxygen. The second phase of photosynthesis is called light independent. This is also known as the Kelvin cycle. Carbon dioxide, CO2, ATP, and NADPH from the light dependent reaction are used up. So these things are considered reactants because they're used up. And in the end, the product that is produced is 1 glucose. Now, a couple things to note. The ATP and the NADPH, these are the products in the first reaction, and they become the reactants in the second, with the ultimate product of the whole thing is being glucose and, of course, our oxygen. Glucose is the basic building block for more complex sugars such as starches, also known as polysaccharides, so it becomes really important in our body. So here's just a quick phase overview. Can you identify what some of the inputs are? Let's just look at the first reaction. So we have water, we have light. And they produce oxygen here. We'll get into this a little bit more later on, but it also produces that ATP and NADPH. So for the first light-dependent reaction, there's only two inputs, water and light. And it has three outputs, oxygen, NADPH, and ATP. For the light independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle, it also has some inputs or reactants. It needs a CO2, it needs ATP and NADPH. And it has some additional products, NAD positive, DP positive, and ADP. After this is broken, it produces these things. And it also produces our starch. We'll go over these phases in more depth later on. So what I want for you to do right now is, what are the two phases of photosynthesis again? What are the inputs and outputs of each phase, the main ones? And what is the chemical equation for photosynthesis? Our next objective, we're going to be identifying the structures of chloroplasts. We need to identify where light-dependent and independent reactions occur. And we're going to understand the inputs of light-dependent and independent reactions. Let's talk a little bit more about chloroplasts. So if we look right here, we have a leaf. And then if we zoom in even further, there's different parts of the leaves. Some of you saw these guard cells, which make up the stomata. And basically, that's where the gas exchange occurs. So CO2 enters into the plant cell and oxygen is released out of the plant. We also have some other parts of the leaf. In purple here we have a vein, and then right below that are just some cells, plant cells. If we zoom in on some of those mesophyll cells, you have all these green circles. Those are known as chloroplasts. And if we zoom in on one of those chloroplasts, they're made up of even more additional green discs. We'll talk about those on the next slide. So here's one chloroplast. If we look at the chloroplast, it has an outer membrane and an inner membrane. It also has granum, which is a stack of what we call thylakoids. So this is one thylakoid, and a stack of them is called a granum. All those. It also has some aqueous space, which we know of as the stroma, which is the space between the different granum. Thylakoids. These are flattened sac-like membranes arranged in stacks, and the stacks are called grana or granum. This is where light-dependent reactions take place. Electron transport occurs in the thylakoid membrane. Stroma, that's the fluid-filled space outside of the grana, so it's in between the different stacks. Light-independent reactions take place there. So right now, I want you to think about what is the equation for photosynthesis and write it down. Where do light-dependent reactions take place? Where does independent reactions take place? And what are the inputs of light-dependent reactions and what are the outputs?